Hey everyone, it's Pastor Travis. So today I want to talk about 5 things I wish the average person in the pew understood about youth ministry. So when talking about youth ministry, for those of you who don't know, I'm a youth pastor. That's what I do. I work with teenagers, and there are some things that I just wish people understood. And it's not necessarily that people are doing the wrong thing. It's just that they could do things a lot better, understanding certain aspects of youth culture today and certain things that the teenagers are going through. And so that's really what I want to address today. So if you have a youth pastor in your church and you really want to help that youth pastor out, these are these are 5 things that you might want to keep in mind about their job and what they're actually doing, what they're trying to do. So let's get started. The first thing I want everyone to know about youth ministry today is that the world of today's teenagers is largely post-Christian. So there was a expectation a few generations back that people would take their kids to church, that people would take their teenagers to church. That is for a large to a large extent not happening today. There are other things competing for the church's for these teenagers' time. Sports used to not be scheduled on Sundays, and now a lot of sports are. There used to be a period of time when it was kind of understood that church was a priority, and that's not the case anymore. Beyond that, there's not a lot of pressure from the peers of these teenagers to go to church. And in fact, there's a lot of misinformation floating around on places like TikTok and YouTube Shorts that people will look at, and they'll say, oh, well, if that's what the church is about, then I don't want to go there to begin with. And beyond that, there's actually in a lot of cases, pressure from their peers not to go to church. And so we're living in a weird time where, there might still be some pressure to go to church from the older generations of the church, but not really in the younger generations. That doesn't exist anymore. And that's one reason why this can be called the first post-Christian generation. Generation Z has been called, not by me, but by others. And I actually agree with the assessment that Generation Z is the first post-Christian generation. And it's for reasons like that. So that leads me to my second point. The same techniques that have worked in the past probably won't work today. So if someone comes up to you and say you start a meal on Wednesday evenings, and in order to bring students in, so you feed the students, you have time where you play games, and then you have the lesson, right? That wouldn't have been necessary in past times necessarily, because there was that expectation that the parents would bring their students to church, that the students would be in church. That wasn't really the difficulty before. But then someone comes up and says, well, you should probably cut this because you're not having as big of an impact as you thought that you might. I want people with that kind of attitude to understand that what happened before was that individuals brought their students to church, and it was expected that the students would be in church, and that's not the case anymore. And so the same techniques that have worked in the past, just having a service and expecting people to show up, it's not going to work anymore. These students have a million things competing for their time and their attention, and you have to give them some reason to show up. Why would I show up to church whenever this place over here is offering me something that in the moment seems better, even though we know that the gospel is infinitely better than anything they offer? But to the teenager who may not have a relationship with Christ, this thing over here is gonna seem a lot better. And so you have to understand that a lot of times these things are done with a specific purpose in mind, and that is to draw students so that we can teach the gospel to them. The analogy I like to use is this: you wouldn't go fishing without bait on the hook, right? You wouldn't do that. So you don't get a fish unless you give that fish some reason to bite. At the same time, you don't draw students unless you give them a reason to show up. In today's culture, that's not going to it's not going to work just to expect them to show up. You have to give them a reason to show up. So that leads me to my third point, and that is that missional is important. Youth pastors have to be more missional now than they ever have before. That means that youth pastors have to go into the community and intentionally do things that they wouldn't have had to have done before to draw students into the youth group. They wouldn't have had to have gone and had lunch with students in their youth group, or they wouldn't have had to have gone and gone to these different events to just for the purpose of trying to strike up conversation, right? I think the town I'm in is a really big football town, and during every home football game, we have youth pastors who go to the football games and strike up conversation. We have an after party after every home football game, win or lose. We have an after party. We have to do these things and be very intentional about the mission, because if we don't, then we're not going to draw students at all. So I've had students come to the after party, what we call fifth quarter, and but not come to the church. But while they're at fifth quarter, they get food, they get all of this stuff, and they get the gospel message. There are several of us who rotate giving a message every time. And so those are students that, at least for some of them, I know for a fact, because I've had conversations with them, don't have a church home, don't go to church. And so we have to be intentionally missional about that, because if we're not, then those students just won't even show up on our campus to begin with. And I would rather them hear the message of the gospel and be convicted, and 10 years down the road have a change in their heart, than for them never to hear it to begin with. A fourth thing, and it kind of related, kind of not, to what I've said. The fourth thing I want people to understand is that teenagers today face a mental health crisis. And we can discuss what the source of this is, but there's a high level of anxiety, a high level of depression among students. There's a lot going on in their lives, and I think it's more important than ever. I, as a youth pastor, have to understand these things at a deeper level than someone 20 or 30 years ago would have had to, simply because this is something that this generation is facing, and my generation faced it to a large degree. We faced, we millennials had anxiety issues, right? That's what we're known for, but this is continuing into Generation Z, and I want us to understand that that teenagers today are facing this mental health crisis, and we can't take it lightly. I have to be prepared to counsel someone more so than I would have had to have been prepared 20 years ago. The last thing that I want to talk about is this. The fifth thing is that we need all hands on deck. Youth ministry isn't something that you just hire a youth pastor to do and then everything goes smooth. And I'm fortunate that I'm part of a church that pitches in and helps out. So this isn't necessarily my church, but I've been in churches where the teenagers were seen more as a burden than in one church I grew up in, teenagers were seen more as a burden than anything else. They're not contributing financially, and this particular church didn't appreciate that. It was there was more going on, and if you want to know a little bit more about that particular church, you can see the video I did on my testimony. But I've been in churches where youth ministry was just seen as something that was tolerated, but not necessarily something that was good. And so I've seen where it's been difficult to get leaders to step up in youth ministry in past churches. And again, I'm fortunate that in my church we don't have that problem. We have people stepping up all the time to help out in different areas. But I know it is a problem for some churches, and I want people to understand that we need all hands on deck. We need everyone who is able to help with the teenagers to help out. And there are several reasons for this. One, it's better for a student to see several people live out their faith in their daily lives than it is for them to see one person live it out. So if my wife and I were the only ones who were living out our faith in front of the teenagers, that wouldn't be as good as if the teenagers in our youth group saw, 7 or 8 other adults living out their faith as well. Because someone else might have gone through a challenge, or might be going through a challenge that will help the teenagers out a lot more and understand how to relate their faith to their life better than someone who maybe I haven't had an experience that the teenager is going through. And so I don't have much practical advice to talk about how to live my faith in the middle of a particular trial. But someone else who has been through that might be able to offer that advice. So we need all hands on deck. We need as many people helping as possible. So if you're in a church and there's a youth pastor in your church who's asking for help, please take that seriously. Because the youth pastor can't really do everything on his own. There's just no way for that no way for one person to handle everything there. If one person handles everything, you're going to get the bare minimum probably in everything. But yeah, I want us to understand that we need all hands on deck. These are 5 things that I wish everyone knew about youth ministry. And please, again, if you're in a church with a youth pastor, take these seriously. And I would encourage you to go to your youth pastor and say, hey, how can I get plugged in? What do I need to do to help you out? It may not necessarily, you may not be up there teaching every week, but, or even ever. But you might be able to find a youth pastor who says, I could use you to run a PowerPoint slide, or I could use you to handle this particular thing, or I could use you to help, get the teenagers some snacks. Something like that can be incredibly helpful. So I just want everyone out there to take these seriously, and see how you can help out your youth pastor, because this next generation of Christians are worth it. So that's all I have for today. We'll see you in the next video.